Hello everyone and welcome to this 2 Degrees podcast. My name is Stephen Kennett and at the recent Business for Environment Summit in London I met up with Thomas Tang of AECOM Asia for a chat about the future of cities. I'm here with Thomas Tang, Regional Director of AECOM Asia. We've heard a lot in the sessions about the role cities will play in cutting carbon emissions in coming years. What progress have you seen being made by cities in Asia?
When you talk of cities now in Asia or elsewhere in the world, you're really no longer talking just of cities, communities. We're talking about mega cities. They are kind of populations of more than 10 million. Now we're looking at 19 mega cities, a third of which are in Asia, compared to 2 mega cities 50 years ago. So really, what we're seeing is an explosion of these cities. So, having said that, cities are not a bad thing because in terms of carbon issues, you have economies of scale, you have common systems, lots of common platforms. So if anything, cities reduce individual carbon footprints. But carry that argument further, because now what the challenges that cities in the world are facing are carrying capacity in terms of housing, transport, water, energy, waste. All these things now have impacts on carbon, and not just on carbon. They also have impacts on air quality, they have impacts on water quality, etc. The carbon issue, I think, is important because clearly that's steering towards our future. But in existence now, cities have a number of challenges, and we're striving towards solutions.
Okay. I mean, one of the figures which we've heard talked about over the last couple of days is the population is projected to double by 2050. Do you think the current progress which is being made in cutting carbon emissions is radical enough to accommodate this shift in urbanisation?
Yeah, I mean, the challenge for cities now is looking at how to set themselves targets against the backdrop of this growth in population and this growth in economic activity. The direction you find most cities are going are reductions in efficiency. You'll look at metrics such as carbon intensity, which is really about how do you reduce the intensity per unit of GDP. And that's a probably more useful metric in terms of then designing your systems, designing programs to take out inefficiency, looking at integration of certain features. Smart grid springs to mind, your intelligent buildings spring to mind. So really, when you talk about how a city is going to address the carbon challenge in the future, these are some things that will come on the table.
I mean, do you think the way these cities are developed and run will need to adapt if we are to deliver the sort of low carbon communities on a scale which is predicted in places like China?
Yeah, I mean, the cities will adapt. I mean, it is, let's kind of qualify this in the sense that we talk of cities. Cities are actually living entities, and it is not so much the systems and hardware which will adapt, which inevitably it will, but there's also the soft side, which is to do with the populations, their willingness to accept certain measures, and then the leadership. In a way, cities being units of kind of communities makes it easier for leaders to drive these kind of measures through. So in the end, I think the successful cities will be the ones that have the successful leadership.
I mean, you mentioned one technology, smart grids, but do you see other trends emerging in terms of transport infrastructure, the way utilities are delivered, and that side of things?
Sure. I mean, the smart grid is an example because it captures a lot of the integration of energy with other utilities such as housing, transport, water, etc. Of course, I mean, each individual area will advance in its own way. I mean, you see incredible advances in water recycling, for instance. You see incredible advances in waste reduction and what they call closed-loop economies of reusing materials after use. So I think a lot of these ideas will spring forth. As I said, it's really how cities will, if you like, kind of use these ideas in a meaningful and practical way. And it's really time looking at the boundaries of the city. So within that, you have scope to do an awful lot.
what do you think more established cities can do to curb their carbon emissions?
Yeah. No, I'm glad you raised that point, Steve, because new cities is often easy to plan in hindsight. You could look at the integrated approach, and now there's enough a body of knowledge on looking at climate adaptation systems. So you could design buildings, you could design systems, utilities, for climate change. I think it's the existing cities where it's going to be the harder challenge, where it's actually more difficult to retrofit some of these systems in place. My sense of this is that there will be an element of retrofitting. You'll see buildings, roads, transport infrastructure, water infrastructure, etc., modified and refined to look at achieving greater efficiencies, better performance, etc. But I think fundamentally you need to look at behaviour change. And the only way that behaviour change will be driven by incentives and disincentives. I'm thinking here in particular of things like road pricing. That will institute an immediate change in transport behaviour. Green labelling. If you look at that, how they're using the labelling system for buildings and for products, will immediately influence consumer choice and developer choice. And I guess in the end, it's the pricing of externalities, the pricing of carbon costs. That will be the driver that actually gets people to start changing their behaviour.
I mean, we've talked a lot about the kind of urbanisation, particularly in countries like China. I mean, what do you think the social impact is going to be of these type of trends? And are we seeing this already?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, if you look throughout Asia, not just China, but throughout Asia and different cities, a few things are springing to mind now, which seem to be commonalities amongst these different locations. One is the wealth divide. As more and more people come to cities seeking economic opportunities, you'll find that the distribution of wealth starts getting very pronounced, where certain parts of the population become a lot better off than the other parts. In other words, wealthy people get wealthier, poorer people get poorer. And this has been a real source of concern for many governments. How do you deal with this kind of challenge to the social fabric? That's the first one. And I think the second one is that it's a demographic challenge that cities face, where in about 20, 30 years' time, we'll be seeing huge swaths of aging populations. 1 in 4, 1 in 5 people will be over 65 in Asia. And that itself is going to represent a significant challenge. Let alone climate change, which will be affecting us universally. You'll find that the way the cities will be designed and run will have to cater for a population that is elderly.
Great. And just one final question. I mean, if you had to choose a city in Asia to kind of watch in the coming 5 to 10 years, what would you choose?
Okay, I would actually give you a range of cities to look at, because there's a lot of exciting stuff happening in Asia. I would take Tianjin in China for kind of eco-city planning, because there's been a lot of foreign investment put into Tianjin, where the buildings are now incredibly energy efficient. I mean, they've really brought the best minds in Asia to come and design and build the structures there. I would recommend you look at Hong Kong for its transport systems, because of the way that the public transit systems bridging the different modes of rail, road, and sea, have all come together in a very compact and very efficient manner. I would look at Songju in Korea, where they've really looked at the essence of technology, and they've made it what you could probably call a wired city, where the access to the internet and access to all the services that are driven along the backbone of this particular technology are now accessible to every member of the public there. And then the last one I would urge you to have a look at is Singapore, where there's been a kind of convergence of different things, because of its location and because of its particular situation. Singapore has really striven to look at independence in an economic and ecological way. So water recycling systems there are fantastic. If you You look at some of the technologies that have gone in there to really push and drive for water conservation, water reuse targets. The waste that's produced there goes into waste to energy. You look at the very compact transport systems they have there with one of the earliest pioneering uses of road pricing and vehicle restriction. There's a lot there that's actually quite interesting and quite innovative in terms of how they move forward.
Great. Thank you very much for your time.